Great to be connecting with you today, Sonia.
Yeah, it's nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, you as well. And I'm really excited to have you in the new LSAT courses. How's everything been coming along for you?
It's good. I've had some interesting strides with my logic games, which was really exciting,
Oh, awesome. Tell me more. What's been happening for you?
especially with some of the more challenging games. That I've been really trying to hone in on the grouping games and diagramming enough that I can go through the questions quickly. So yesterday I was doing the section 35 logic games, and I found them pretty tricky, but I had an epiphany during the games, which was really exciting, and I was able to refine the diagrams really well. And so that was a pretty big step for me.
Awesome. Yeah, you've got to celebrate those wins when you get that one key insight that changes everything for you about a game. It's really extraordinary. And that's what makes it all worthwhile, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about how I can help. I know that you sent over some questions. I just got them a few hours ago, but I really wanted to meet with you. So maybe we can keep it more general in nature. What are some overarching themes related to your struggles in logic games or with the LSAT overall?
I think sometimes I just, like I said, I have trouble getting the diagram to the point that I notice that you get the logic games, like you make the diagram, you'll do a few diagrams such that you really limit the possibilities. You go beyond the rules that are laid out. And I can generally make like a few basic inferences. I'm pretty comfortable with the conditional reasoning, how to reverse the conditional statements, all of that. But I just can't I often miss like some really helpful inferences that you make in your logic games. So I'll usually get the basics down, but then there's that extra diagram that you make. And sometimes I just miss those steps.
Yeah, it's funny you bring this up because a lot of folks have been asking me about this very topic lately. How do you know when to make multiple main diagrams? What's the key? Because when you do make that major inference and it unlocks the game for you, that's like an aha moment, the light bulb moment that unlocks the game. And when you can do it, it's extraordinary, but you can't always do it. So part of it comes through intuition and practice, but there are a few key hints I can give you to be on the lookout for. One of them would be if you see a particular variable appearing in multiple rules, that variable itself is often the wedge. If that variable could only be in 2 to 4 spots, you just draw 2 to 4 main diagrams with each of those placements. You see the cascading inferences that result, like a domino effect. So you use that. The key is that you want to be methodical when you're creating these diagrams.
And would you recommend, so for one example, I think it was the multi-level sequencing game, the one that you made up or a student made up with Brad and Angelina.
Right.
And I guess I noticed that you did the diagrams with multiple ones with Angelina, and it kind of clicked after I looked over, because I was able to do the questions without making the diagrams like you did, but it took me a lot longer. So those multiple diagrams really speed things up. And I'm wondering if the fact that the Angelina variable, you use that to make the diagrams because it's so limited, like once you put the other information in your first diagram.
Right, yeah.
Go about it, you use like a very limited variable, and that's usually the one that you move around.
Exactly. So oftentimes, especially with ordering games and matching games as well, actually, if there are only a few potential placements of a variable on a slot, you just draw out each of those possibilities, again, typically 2 to 4 possibilities. And then using that, you see the resulting potential inferences, and you just draw those out. And these main diagrams, of course, they won't be fully fleshed out all the time, usually not. So you have to be okay with a little bit of ambiguity. But if you can place maybe a third of the variables or half the variables as a result on these main diagrams, you have much less to deal with later over the course of the game. So it's in a way, it's front loading the work, which I think is typically more efficient when possible. In general with games, you want to become comfortable with drawing a lot of diagrams. With the main diagrams, the keys that you're drawing them methodically and systematically. You're not just drawing a handful of random diagrams. And then with local questions, same thing, be okay with drawing. Drawing is how you think, it's how you learn, because you can't do it all in your head.
Yeah. And I noticed in one of the videos you noted to start with, I think it was orientation, local, and then global, I believe. So you're using those local diagrams essentially to weed out some possible answer choices in other global questions, for example.
Exactly. So the local diagrams, the nice thing about them is they happen to be valid hypothetical scenarios. And so later, if you have a global must be true or could be true or cannot be true, these local diagrams you've drawn previously, as well as the correct answer to the orientation question, can typically help you eliminate a couple of choices for the global questions. Aside from logic games, what else is going on for you with your prep, just in more general terms? Study schedule, fitting in the time, practice tests, what else is happening for you?
I'm generally doing I'll do at least a couple sections on the weekend, but I've started doing a full test every Sunday for the month of August while I'm not in school. Generally, I do about 3 to 4 days of studying a week for August. And I've been focusing on logic games because that was easily my weakest section. And it used to be my strongest section. So I focused a lot on logical reasoning and reading comp, which I particularly found difficult for my exam. But then I guess I focused so much on those and not enough on the logic games. So then the other two I did much better. And then the logic games I actually did a lot worse, which was kind of surprising. So now I'm kind of focusing on that and then going to try to do a full test just to keep everything else fresh. One thing I noticed about logical reasoning is I've been keeping track of when I do a section, I'll keep and review it. I'll write down what type of question the ones I got wrong were, or even the ones I struggled with. And I was hoping to find a pattern so that I could kind of hone in on what I find difficult, but there doesn't seem to be any real pattern. And I'm wondering, I don't know if you have any advice on that kind of situation, or it's just general practice. There are obviously usually questions later in the section, so they're going to be more challenging. But
yeah, that's exactly right. So a lot of times when someone like yourself, you've been studying for a while, you have a basic familiarity with the different question types. What happens then is you're getting difficult questions wrong just because they're difficult, but it's no longer about a misunderstanding of the basics of that question type. So I want you to think, going beyond just the question stem, to think about the methods of reasoning in the stimulus, as well as the patterns in tempting wrong answer choices and discouraging right answer choices. That's the kind of analysis you really want to do, especially on logical reasoning and reading comprehension, where you have those ambiguities of language.
okay.
What does your review process look like right now?
I always circle questions that I have trouble with. So even if I get them right, I'll usually go back and review that one as well. And I'll try to see exactly, maybe break down the argument, see why I would have thought something was incorrect. And then I use a lot of your explanations that you've posted to try to make sure that I'm understanding the reasoning process. So that's kind of how I go about it. I don't know if you have any way of maybe making my review better. That's another thing that I'm not quite sure how to review.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to help with that. Have you experimented a lot with writing out your thought process or talking it out with someone?
No, that's actually a good idea. Like I'll sometimes do write out especially if there's conditional statements, I'll usually try to do that in the question. But if I don't have time, I will do it when I'm reviewing the question. But I haven't tried explaining it to someone, which does sound like it would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Either find a study partner, either locally or online, or get a tutor or a coach, someone you could really have a conversation with where you're forcing yourself or they're forcing you to articulate your thought process. And if that's not available to you, then just writing it out in a notebook, not just diagramming the logic of a formal logic stimulus, but rather actually writing out exactly what was tempting about a wrong answer that made you pick it and what ultimately made it wrong, and what was discouraging about the right answer that pushed you away from it and what ultimately made it correct. So that's about the answer choices, but you could also look at maybe you misinterpreted something related to the question type. In some of the tougher questions, they use unfamiliar wording, or it could just be the method of reasoning in the stimulus was particularly dense and hard to get a handle on.
Yeah, it does seem to be like obviously a lot of the longer questions that I struggle with just because it's more material to try to go through in a short span of time.
Yeah, and you don't need to do this for every single question, of course, but for the toughest ones, the ones you had the most trouble with, the ones you might have gotten wrong on 2 or 3 different attempts, there's still something to learn there, of course, because the exam does repeat itself. And what's going to help you get a top score is having that pattern recognition where you can automatically relate a new question you're seeing back to a previous one, even when the topic or the method of reasoning is the topic is different, but the method of reasoning is the same. So I think the review process is the biggest thing I would suggest that you add to your study program overall. So doing one exam a week, then I would say that's not so much material that you can't add in the time for the review as well. A lot of times folks will do 2 or 3 exams a week, which doesn't leave enough time for review and also covering weak areas, of course.
Would you recommend doing more per week or just trying to focus? Because I'm writing in September 20th. So I won't have too much time in September to study. That'll be max like once a week before the test. But in August, if I have more time, would you recommend increasing the numbers of full exams so I can practice my endurance? Or do you think 1 a week is a good amount?
How many full-length exams have you done up to this point?
Oh gosh, I've probably lost track, to be honest. I did quite a few in the 4 months leading up to the June exam. So honestly, I'm not sure at that point. I did pretty rigidly follow your schedule. So whatever was included in that schedule, the 4-month plan, plus extra on top of that. And then last summer, I studied on my own as well. So I've done quite a few, but I've left quite a few recent ones for, getting closer to the exam.
Good. Then I think you've done enough. You've done enough. You have enough full-length 5-section, I assume, exams under your belt to the point where you don't need to ramp it up to be 2 per week. I would suggest instead maintain 1 per week, add in more detail and depth to your review process, whether it's finding a study partner or a coach or tutor or writing it out in a notebook, and ideally both, of course. And then adding in some review of any particular weak areas, either as individual timed sections or doing untimed work by type or studying more resources like videos and podcasts and such. What else would you need to have in order to feel complete for today? How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling pretty good. The logic game tips were very helpful. I think just my timing, I don't know how to increase that, but I guess just going through review is going to be the crucial thing. So reviewing, like you suggested, is going to be super important because, like you said, it's more the difficult questions that I have trouble with and the unusual games that I have trouble with. So I don't know if you have any more tips. I've watched all your videos to do with unusual logic games. I have your list of unusual logic games. I don't know if you have any extra advice for that. I tend to be tripped up I'm a pretty linear thinker, so I tend to be kind of tripped up when something's outside of the box. Is that just practice?
It is practice, and it's great that you have the list of unusual curveball games, because if you run through those, you'll be in a better position than most to encounter something new. And it's really about throwing yourself into these unfamiliar situations where you do have to think outside the box, but ultimately recognize that although the game diagram may appear different, or there may not be much of a diagram at all, the underlying logic is still the same as all the other games up to this point. The other thing I would add in there is reviewing specifically rule substitution and rule equivalency questions, which started in, I believe, exam 57 up to present. Nearly every exam has had at least one of those. And so you could drill rule substitution questions, just doing those individual questions for each game from the past 30 exams. And that will be another way to check all the boxes and make sure that you've covered everything you need to before September. It's been great connecting with you, Sonia. What would you say is the biggest insight you got from our session today?
I'd probably say just the review, getting into more detail, because I never really understood what review meant. It sounds silly, but actually trying to explicitly write down things in your own words, not just diagramming, that seems like a really good way to hone in on where I'm making my mistakes.
Excellent. Add that in. That's honestly the top scorers. That's the biggest thing that makes the difference for them, because it's really forcing you to learn from your mistakes to avoid making them again. It's not enough to do exam after exam and measure your results. The review of what you got wrong, what you had difficulty with, that's going to be where your biggest gains come from. So I'm excited to see what changes for you as a result of implementing the new strategy.
Yeah. Your courses have been the most helpful I've read a lot of the terrible books, Kaplan and all of those, and saw no improvement in my exams. So this has really helped me hone in on how to improve my score.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. And please keep in touch. I'm here for you if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. And also please come to the live online classes that I teach regularly. I'd love to have you there and address your questions. And if you ever can't make one, just email your questions in advance and I'll do my best to cover them. And then you'll have the recording later inside the course platform.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your help, Steve. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Sonia. Have a great rest of your week and be in touch. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.